The tail rotor exploded at 11,000 feet. 1 second, Maya Reed was flying 6 of the most dangerous men alive through Colombian darkness. The next, the Black Hawk was spinning uncontrolled, violent, screaming metal, and the mountainside was coming up fast enough to count the trees. She had maybe 12 seconds to save everyone aboard. Maybe less. This is the story of a woman they called just the pilot. By the time it was over, nobody called her that again. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The briefing had lasted 40 minutes, and Maya had spent most of it, listening to men who didn't think she needed to be in the room. That was fine. She was used to it. FOB Condor sat at 8,000 feet in the Colombian Andes, a cluster of prefabricated buildings and satellite dishes carved into a ridge that had no business supporting anything heavier than cloud cover. The air tasted thin and metallic, and the generators ran 24 hours, because the cold at night was genuine and unforgiving. Maya had been stationed here for 11 weeks. She knew every crack in the floor of the operations center, every radio frequency the comms team used, every blind spot in the perimeter cameras. She also knew that when Tier 1 units came through, the regular personnel were expected to become furniture. The 6 men who filed into the briefing room at 2,130 hours carried that particular weight that's special operations. People develop not arrogance exactly, but a complete absence of concern about how they appeared to anyone watching. They moved efficiently, dropped their kit, and arranged themselves around the map table without ceremony. Their team leader, a chief petty officer named Marcus Kane, was built like a man who had been compressed at some point and never fully expanded. He had dark eyes and a jaw that suggested he had made peace with discomfort a long time ago. The intelligence officer, a civilian contractor named Holloway, who sweated through his collar in any temperature, walked them through the objective. A mid-level cartel logistics coordinator named Rios had been tracked to a compound 40 kilometers north, in a valley accessible only by air due to the road network being actively mined. The window was narrow. Cloud cover was forecast to thicken by 200. The package was to be extracted alive. Standard enough. Except that the compound sat in a valley with one viable ingress corridor and high ground on 3 sides. Maya studied the terrain overlay and said nothing. Insertion will be NOE, Holloway said, meaning nap of the earth flying low and fast, using terrain to mask the approach. He glanced at Maya with the look people gave helicopter pilots when they wanted to acknowledge their existence without actually engaging with it. Flight time, approximately 22 minutes. Weather looks marginal, Maya said. Holloway blinked. It's within parameters. It's within your parameters. I'm telling you the conditions I'm going to be flying in. Kane looked at her then, not with irritation, more like he was cataloging something. He had the kind of eyes that ran quick assessments without making it obvious. Chief Reed, he said. It wasn't a question, just her name, establishing that he knew it. Chief Warrant Officer, Maya said. Not correcting him, just being precise. You've flown this corridor before? 4 times, 3 at night. He nodded once and went back to the map. That was apparently all the conversation required. Her co-pilot, Ethan Cole, was waiting for her outside the briefing room afterward. Ethan was 26, 3 years out of flight school, and he had a quality that Maya valued above almost everything else. In a co-pilot, he listened. He was also objectively a talented flyer, though he would never admit it because he understood the difference between being talented and being experienced. You catch the terrain on the exfil? He asked, handing her a coffee that had already gone cold. The ridge on the eastern approach. Yeah. We'll need to stay below 800 AGL on the way out. Any lower, and we're in the trees. Any higher, and we're radar visible. Ethan made a sound that wasn't quite agreement, and wasn't quite concern. And if the weather comes in faster than forecast. Maya drank the cold coffee. Then we do what we always do. Improvise extensively and file an accurate report afterward. You're learning. They lifted off at 2,247. The Black Hawk call sign Raven 6 came off the pad in total darkness, running without external lights, and Maya dropped it immediately to 100 feet of the ridge line and pushed the nose forward. The aircraft knew her by now, or she knew it, which amounted to the same thing. She flew by feel and instrument in equal measure, the mountains rising around them like walls, the rotors beating against air that was colder and rougher than the weather report had suggested. In the back, the 6 SEALs were doing what operators do before a mission, nothing visible. No last-minute weapons checks, no dramatic pre-battle rituals. A couple of them had their eyes closed. One was eating something from a foil packet. Kane sat near the door, watching the dark ground slide past below, with an expression that was professionally empty. The radio crackled. Ethan monitored frequencies. Maya flew. Winds picking up on the northern ridgeline, Ethan said quietly. Gusting. I feel it. The aircraft slightly as a gust pushed the tail. Maya corrected without thinking, the adjustment small and immediate. In the back, nobody seemed to notice. That was the point. The turbulence you felt meant the pilot hadn't caught it fast enough. Raven 6, Condor Actual. The radio voice belonged to the operations center. Be advised, weather window is tightening. Recommend expedite. Raven 6 copies. Already moving. 22 minutes became 17 as Maya pushed the speed envelope, keeping the aircraft at a height that would have made most pilots nervous. The mountains on either side were visible only as slightly darker shapes against a dark sky, edges defined by starlight that kept threatening to disappear beneath cloud cover. She navigated by terrain feature and memory and the instrument panel's green glow, making corrections that Ethan was tracking but not calling because he'd learned when to trust her, and this was one of those times. Then the valley appeared below the ridge, and she nosed the aircraft down into it. 2 minutes, she called back. In the cargo bay, the SEALs came alive. Quiet, efficient movement. Equipment checked. Weapons ready. Kane touched his radio once, confirming comms. The man eating the foil packet folded it carefully and tucked it into a pocket. Even the trash was accounted for. The LZ was a flat shelf of cleared ground north of the compound, barely large enough for a Black Hawk with maneuvering room. Maya had memorized it from satellite imagery. She set up the approach and brought the aircraft down through 60 feet, 40, 20. The SEALs were out before the skids touched dirt. She held the aircraft in ground effect, rotors hammering, while the team moved away from the downdraft and into the tree line. Ethan was already monitoring. The whole process took 11 seconds. Then Maya pulled up and climbed back out of the valley. Raven 6 is off the LZ, holding at waypoint November. Condor copies. Package is moving. Waiting was the part that didn't appear in recruitment videos. Maya flew a slow orbit 8 kilometers from the objective, high enough to be outside small arms range, low enough to respond quickly when the call came. Ethan monitored 3 separate radio channels. The operations center provided intermittent updates that amounted to "The team is moving. Stand by." "You hungry?" Ethan asked. "No. I've got half a granola bar." "I'm good." A long pause. The aircraft moved through darkness. Below, the mountains were invisible except for occasional patches of reflected light, a farmhouse, a road, the silver thread of a river. "They good in there?" Ethan asked. Not asking about the SEALs, specifically. Asking about the mission feel. Holloway's timeline was optimistic. Holloway's timelines are always optimistic. This one more than usual. Maya checked her fuel state. 40 minutes of working fuel remaining before she'd need to return to the forward arming and refueling point. If they're not out in 20, we have a problem. Define problem. We're flying back empty, and someone else comes to get them. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Kane didn't strike me as someone who accepts that outcome. Kane doesn't get a vote on the fuel gauges. The radio broke squelch. Raven 6 Lima 3. Package secure. Moving to exfil. ETA 12 minutes. Maya rolled the aircraft back toward the valley. Raven 6 is inbound. 13 minutes. The night fell apart at the 8-minute mark. Maya was descending back toward the valley, running the approach corridor, when the tone changed in her headset, the particular quality of radio traffic that meant something had gone wrong without anyone saying so yet. Multiple transmissions overlapping. Kane's voice clipped, contact, Eastern Ridge. They were waiting for us. Then the shooting started. Even at altitude through the airframe, she could hear it or feel it, the vibration of weapons at distance, resolving into something her body recognized before her mind processed it. Ethan pulled up the tactical display. They're compromised. Eastern approach. I see it. Condor actual. Raven 6. Advise. The operations center was already talking. Maya was already making decisions. The valley had 3 possible approach lines. The one she'd planned was now a shooting gallery. The second was too narrow for the aircraft at night. The third, a shallow draw on the western side that she had memorized but not planned to use, was possible. Barely. The trees on both sides were close enough that the rotor wash would knock branches down. She had flown worse. Raven 6 is rerouting, western draw approach. Raven 6, confirm. Western draw is not the planned. I'm aware of what it's not. Raven 6 out. Ethan looked at her sideways but said nothing. She threaded the aircraft through the draw at 40 knots, slower than she wanted, faster than was comfortable. The rotor disc, clearing the tree line by margins, she was measuring in feet rather than meters. The aircraft yawed twice in rotor wash from the terrain features. She corrected both times. Ethan called the trees on his side without being asked. They came out of the draw into the lower valley, with the LZ 300 meters ahead. Green smoke was rising from it, the SEALs' signal. But the muzzle flashes on the eastern ridge were visible now, maybe a dozen points of light, sustained and organized. This wasn't a patrol that had stumbled onto them. This was a prepared ambush that had been waiting. They knew the package was moving, Ethan said. Yeah. She brought the aircraft in fast, flared hard, dropped it onto the LZ with more authority than finesse. The skids hit. The cargo door was already open before she steadied. The SEALs came out of the darkness in pairs, moving fast. One man was limping. Another was helping someone else. She couldn't get a count from the cockpit. Gunfire was closer now. Much closer. Kane's voice on the radio, 2 feet from the aircraft, were short one. Ramirez is forward. How forward? 40 meters. Tree line. Maya kept her eyes on the instruments and the ridge line simultaneously. 40 meters forward in an active ambush was a different country entirely. Raven 6 can hold 60 seconds, she transmitted. Copy. Loading. The SEALs moved through the cargo bay. She heard the crew chief calling them in. 5. She needed 6 plus Kane. The eastern ridge lit up. Rounds hit the aircraft. Not the fuselage, something else. The sound was distinctive, a series of impacts that weren't gunfire, but were worse than gunfire, a mechanical crunching that she felt through the collective before she heard it. Something had hit the tail rotor assembly. The aircraft began to yaw immediately slow, at first. Then faster, the torque of the main rotor unopposed now, spinning the airframe like a top. Warning tones cascaded through the cockpit. Ethan's hands were already moving. Tail rotor, he said, as if she didn't know. I know. The Black Hawk was 30 feet above the LZ. She had maybe 4 seconds before the rotation became unrecoverable. Raven 6 is going down. All personnel brace. She chopped the throttle, entered auto-rotation, and drove the aircraft into the ground. The crash was not cinematic. It was noise and impact and darkness, a sequence of sensations that arrived faster than her brain could organize them. The aircraft hit the edge of the LZ, not the center. She had managed to shift it in those last seconds, and the left skid collapsed collapsed immediately, and the airframe pitched hard to the right, and the rotor blades struck the earth, and the sound they made doing so was something, suksam, she would not be able to accurately describe later. Glass from the chin bubble hit her visor. Something slammed her left shoulder hard enough that her arm went briefly numb. The aircraft slid 6 meters through the mud and stopped against something solid, tipped at a 40-degree angle. Then silence. Not complete silence. The fires were still going on the ridge, and the engines were making sounds that engines shouldn't make, but a relative silence, the kind that follows catastrophic noise and feels enormous by comparison. Maya ran the emergency shutdown checklist. It took 11 seconds. Ethan. A breath, then, yeah, I'm here. Count. She pulled herself out of the cockpit door, which now faced partially upward, and dropped to the ground. Her left shoulder was wrong, in a way she noted and set aside. The mud was deep enough to swallow her boots to the ankle. Rain had started while they were flying, and it came down steadily now, tapping on the broken fuselage with complete indifference. The SEALs were out of the aircraft and forming a perimeter within seconds of the crash. Training was a reliable thing. Kane materialized out of the darkness, his face across something that wasn't quite concern, more like rapid recalculation. Status, he said. Aircraft is down, non-recoverable. Maya pulled off her flight helmet and took the rein directly. Pilot and co-pilot mobile. What's your count? 5 SEALs plus me. Ramirez was still forward when we took fire. She looked at the darkness beyond the LZ. The firing from the ridge had shifted. It was moving, working its way down toward their position. And the package? Secured. He's ambulatory. Unhappy, Kane's jaw was set. We just lost our ride out. I noticed. Condor knows we're down? My last transmission went out. They know. Kane stepped away and keyed his radio. Maya went to find Ethan. He was on the ground near the nose of the aircraft, sitting with his back against the crumpled fuselage, doing his own damage assessment. The visor of his flight helmet had a crack in it. He was pressing 2 fingers to his right temple. How bad? She asked. Mild. He meant the head. Shoulder's worse, but I can move it. He looked up at her. You pulled us onto the flat part. I was aiming for the center of the LZ. We're 12 meters short of center. He paused. Still. Without that, we'd be inverted in the tree line. Maya offered her hand. He took it and stood. We're moving out on foot, she said. Extraction point is 3 clicks northeast. I know. I have the map data. He tapped the side of his helmet. Can you carry a weapon? Ethan tested his shoulder. His expression was controlled, but she caught the small flinch. Yes, then we're good. She went back to the perimeter where Kane was organizing the movement. He had pulled his team into a tight defensive arrangement, the SEALs already oriented outward, each man covering a sector without being told to. The package Rios was in the center, zip-tied, and being managed by a SEAL Ortega, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, and was nevertheless completely functional. Rios was not saying anything. He had the specific posture of a man who has been captured before and understands that the immediate aftermath is not the moment for resistance. Kane looked at Maya. You've been out here before. What's between us and the extraction point? 40 meters of open LZ, then jungle. Ridge on the left side runs parallel for most of the route. Narrows before the final approach. She paused. There's a stream crossing about halfway. This rain is going to make it worse than the imagery suggests. He absorbed this. Sidearm. Sig. I'm rated on the M4. He looked at her for a moment, not skeptically, but doing the math. Then he turned to one of his men. Henderson, give her your secondary M4. Henderson, a compact SEAL with a face that seemed permanently sun-damaged, looked at her once, then unstrapped the rifle from his pack without comment. Maya checked the weapon automatically. Loaded, round-chambered, safety on. She slung it. How long before they're on us? She asked Kane. He had an ear tilted toward the ridge, reading the sound of the gunfire, the way experienced soldiers learn to do. 8 minutes. Maybe less if they have vehicles. Then we should be in the tree line in 4. Agreed. He turned to the team. Rio Ortega package. Henderson point. Walsh and Diaz rear. Chief Reed and Cole with me in the center. He paused and looked at Maya with something that was almost a question, but didn't quite get there. You good? I'm good, she said. She had been trained for this. Not the specific scenario, but the specific state, the place past fear, where the body runs on training and the mind narrows down to the immediate problem. She had been to that place once before, 2 years ago, during a different kind of emergency that she had never filed a full report about. She knew what it felt like. It felt like this. Let's move, Kane said. The jungle swallowed them. The first 20 minutes were manageable. Henderson moved point with the particular economy of someone who had done this many times in many countries. He read the terrain the way Maya read weather ahead, scanning, noting things others missed. The team moved in a modified column, tight enough to maintain visual contact in the darkness, spread enough that a single burst couldn't take multiple people down. The package moved with them, without trouble. Rios was keeping up, which meant he was smart enough to understand that his survival was currently attached to theirs. Maya stayed in the center formation, Ethan to her left, Kane just ahead. The jungle at night in the Colombian mountains was not the impenetrable wall of popular imagination. It was something more annoying than that. A dense network of undergrowth and exposed roots and vines at face height that required constant small navigations. Her boots were soaked through within the first 5 minutes. Her shoulder ached with a rhythm that she managed by not acknowledging it. The rain intensified. Behind them, she could hear the search starting. Lights through the trees, distant and moving flashlights or vehicle-mounted lights working the LZ. They'd find the aircraft in minutes. They'd know the direction of travel not long after. Kane dropped back beside her without breaking pace. Rearguard has eyes on pursuit, he said quietly. At least 8 personnel spreading out from the LZ. How organized? Organized enough. He watched the terrain ahead. Someone trained these people. Cartel? Or someone who works for them. A brief pause that was also a calculation. Whoever tipped them about the package knew the extraction plan too. Maya thought about that. Holloway's optimistic timelines. The prepared ambush that had been waiting in exactly the right position. You think there's a leak. I think 8 people don't send set up on the Eastern Ridge, by coincidence, on the same night we're moving a package out. He glanced at her sideways. Operational security is above your pay grade. I know. She stepped over a root. I'm just noting what I see. He almost said something. Instead, he moved back up toward the front of the column. The rear guard found the first patrol at the 40-minute mark. Diaz came up on the radio, voice level, 3 tangos, moving north along our right flank. Parallel course. They don't have eyes on us yet. Kane signaled the column to halt. Everyone stopped. No sound except the rain and their own breathing. Maya watched the forest to her right. Nothing visible. But she believed Diaz. These men had developed senses that were not supernatural but were empirically better than hers at this specific task. The patrol passed, 20 feet away, maybe less. The sound of their movement boots, the click of equipment, a murmured conversation in Spanish passed along the column's flank like a ghost. Nobody on the SEAL team made a sound. Rios held his breath, which Maya noted, which meant he understood Spanish and understood that his captors understood Spanish, and was deciding that silence was his best option. Then the sounds faded north. Kane let 10 seconds pass. Then, move. They moved. The stream hit them at the 80-minute mark, and it was worse than Maya had suggested. The satellite imagery had shown a stream crossing with a width of approximately 4 meters. The rain had been falling for over an hour into a drainage system that fed from the ridgeline, and what they reached at the bottom of a muddy slope was 6 meters wide and moving with the specific urgency of water that has somewhere important to be. The near bank was soft enough that the first seal to approach it sank to his knee before stepping back. Options, Kane said. Henderson had already moved 20 meters upstream. He came back shaking his head. Ortega tried downstream. Same result. We cross here, Maya said. Kane looked at her. The crossing widens further downstream, but shallows. Upstream gets deeper faster. This drainage runs off the north face. Here is the best point. She had the terrain in her head, the satellite imagery that she had studied not because anyone told her to, but because she always studied the terrain of her operational area. It's going to be waist deep in the center. You sure about the depth? No. But I'm more sure about this point than the alternatives. He studied her for a moment then. Walsh. Test the center. Walsh, the biggest seal on the team, by about 30 pounds, waded in without visible emotion. The water hit his waist at the center point. He turned and looked back at Kane with an expression that said, "She's right." They crossed. The package was handled by 2 seals who moved Rios between them through the current with the kind of practiced efficiency that meant they'd done this kind of thing with significantly less cooperative cargo. Ethan crossed on his own, losing his footing once and catching himself without going under. Maya crossed last at Kane's signal, the current pushing at her legs with more authority than she expected, her rifle held above her head, the cold water doing things to her shoulder that she catalogued and ignored. She came out the other side and kept moving. On the far bank, Kane fell in beside her. He said nothing, but she noticed that he had positioned himself between her and the direction of the pursuing lights. The ambush came from the front. They were 20 minutes from the extraction point when Henderson froze, fist raised. Column stop, silence. Then Maya heard it, the particular silence that forms when people in a jungle stop moving because they know you're coming. Not natural quiet, prepared quiet. She brought her rifle up. 3 seconds later, the jungle ignited. AK fire from the left, the right, and directly ahead, a 3-sided box that had been set in darkness and was now executing with a discipline that was not cartel-style standard. Someone with real training had set this ambush. The SEALs responded immediately, the muscle memory of thousands of repetitions driving them into positions of cover before conscious thought could process what was happening. Kane's voice controlled under the noise. "Break right! Break right! Go!" Maya hit the ground behind a fallen tree that was barely wide enough to be useful and started identifying targets by muzzle flash. The noise was complete and overwhelming, the kind of sound that has physical weight. She could feel rounds impacting the log in front of her, and the impacts had a velocity and presence that made the log feel suddenly thin. To her left, 2 SEALs maneuvered in the dark, using the contact as cover for their movement. To her right, someone threw a grenade that converted the immediate source of fire into a brief orange cloud that dropped 2 of the ambushers. Maya was tracking a muzzle flash 15 meters ahead when the man attached to it shifted position, and suddenly she could see him crouched movement through a gap in the undergrowth, angling to her right. She moved her aim and waited. He came into the gap. She fired 3 rounds, controlled. The muzzle flash from her rifle lit the rain for a fraction of a second. The figure dropped and did not move. She kept her eyes open and kept moving. There were things she noticed about herself in those seconds that she would think about later, alone, when there was time to think, that her hands were steady, that her breathing followed the pattern she had practiced, that the fundamental decisions, when to shoot, where to move, how long to hold a position, arrived with a clarity that surprised her. She had been trained with weapons, yes. She had qualified. But qualification is not this. This is different. She had been here before. In the other emergency, she had never filed a complete report about. Her body remembered. Kane's voice cut through the contact, pushing through. "Move! Move! Move!" The SEALs broke the ambush by going straight through it, the counterintuitive response that worked, because ambushes are designed to channel retreating targets, not to handle attackers coming forward into the fire. Maya moved with them. covering right as Henderson covered left. The column pushing through the kill zone in 15 seconds that felt like 4 minutes. On the far side of the ambush, they ran. Not panic-organized, purposeful movement, with the perimeter maintained, the package in the center, the rear guard watching for pursuit. But running nonetheless, the extraction point ahead and the enemy behind, and the rain coming down hard enough now that the jungle itself was making noise to cover them. The radio in Kane's hand crackled. Lima 3, this is Raven 7. Inbound to extraction point. 6 minutes. Authenticate. Kane gave the authentication code without slowing. Copy Lima 3. Prepared to receive. Be advised, we have eyes on pursuit approximately 200 meters behind your position. Expedite. We're expediting, Keynes said and didn't elaborate. The extraction point was a hilltop clearing. Naturally flat, the trees thinning as they climbed the last 50 meters of slope. Maya could hear the helicopter before she could see it, the distinctive beat of rotors cutting through the rain, a sound that had been the background of her entire adult life, and that right now was the best thing she had ever heard. The Black Hawk came over the ridge with its landing light off, navigating by NVG, and settled into the clearing with the kind of precision that told her she was watching a good pilot. It touched down, and the door was open before the skid settled. The team moved. The SEALs went in fast, 1 and 2 at a time, the package moving to the aircraft under Ortega's hand. Ethan was ahead of Maya, moving for the door. She was 5 meters from the aircraft when Kane went down. She didn't see what hit him. One moment, he was moving at her left shoulder, and the next he was on the ground, a sound coming from him that was involuntary, yay, and therefore told her everything about how bad it was. The rounds from the pursuit had caught up. She could hear them now, cracking through the trees at the clearing's edge. Kane was 40 meters from the aircraft. She turned and ran back toward him. Behind her, she heard someone shout her name, Ethan, maybe, or one of the SEALs. She didn't stop. Kane was trying to get up. His legs weren't cooperating. He had been hit in the lower right thigh, and possibly the hip she couldn't tell in the rain and darkness. But the leg wasn't supporting weight. Go, he said. His voice was tight with pain and entirely serious. Get on the aircraft. Hold still. That's an order. I'm a warrant officer, she said, grabbing his vest. I don't take orders well. She got him by the drag handle on his plate carrier and pulled. He was heavier than he looked, which was saying something because he looked heavy. The mud fought her. The rounds kept coming. She heard them, the specific crack of supersonic projectiles passing close enough to have a direction. She pulled anyway. Ethan reached her. He grabbed Kane's other arm without a word, and together they moved him not gracefully, not quickly, but continuously across the mud toward the aircraft. Hands reached from the cargo bay. Kane went up and in. Ethan went up and in. Maya threw herself up through the door as the aircraft was already lifting, the crew chief grabbing her vest and yanking, and then she was on the deck of the Black Hawk with the door open and the jungle falling away below, and the door gunner opening up on the clearing's edge with a methodical thunder that she felt in her back teeth. She lay on the cargo bay floor and breathed. The rain came in through the open door and hit her face. She let it. The cargo bay smelled like blood and wet canvas, and the particular chemical edge of expended ammunition, and Maya lay on the deck for exactly 4 seconds before she made herself sit up. 4 seconds was what she allowed. The Black Hawk was climbing hard, banking north, the door gunner still hammering controlled bursts at the clearing below. Through the open door, Maya could see the hillside dropping away, muzzle flashes from the tree line growing smaller, the pursuit becoming something that was already in the past, even if her hands hadn't fully accepted that yet. She pressed her back against the forward bulkhead and took inventory. Left shoulder was bad, not broken, she could move it. But something in there was wrong, in a way that would need attention, and was currently running on adrenaline's generous credit system. Her flight suit was soaked through, which she'd known since the stream crossing, and the cargo bay's wind at altitude was converting that into a specific kind of cold that settled into the joints. Minor cut above her right eye where something had found her in the crash. She hadn't noticed it until now, which told her how the last 2 hours had prioritized itself. She looked around the bay. Kane was on the opposite side, 2 medics working on him simultaneously, one cutting away his pants leg, the other establishing an IV with the practiced movements of someone who'd done this particular procedure in moving aircraft before. Kane was conscious, watching the medics work with an expression that was pain managed into something that just looked like concentration. He caught Maya's eye across the cargo bay. He didn't nod. He didn't say anything. He held her gaze for a moment and then looked back at his leg. That was something. Ethan was beside her, his shoulder against the bulkhead, his head back, eyes closed. He was breathing deliberately. She put her hand on his arm. He opened one eye. "Still here," he said. "I see that. My helmet's cracked. I know. I'm going to need a new helmet." "File a report," she said. He closed his eye again, already composing it. The 5-5 SEALs who had made it onto the aircraft were in various states of post-contact wind down, the specific kind of controlled decompression that looked like exhaustion, but was actually the body recalibrating after sustained threat. 2 of them were talking quietly, the kind of short-sentence conversation that was mostly just confirmation of shared experience. Henderson was cleaning his rifle with a cloth that he'd produced from somewhere, the motion automatic, his eyes unfocused. Ortega had Rios secured against the far wall, and Rios was staring at the ceiling with the look of a man who had revised his life expectations significantly in the last 3 hours. Diaz, the rearguard SEAL, was looking at Maya, not talking, not doing anything threatening, just looking at her with the kind of direct, unambiguous attention that meant he was deciding something. She met his eyes. He looked away first. FOB Condor appeared below them. 40 minutes later, the lights of the forward base bright enough against the mountain dark to be visible from 2 kilometers out. The pilot, a warrant officer named Garrett, whom Maya knew slightly, a capable man who flew, without flourish, brought the aircraft in with efficient precision, and the skids touched the pad at 147 hours. The base's trauma team was already on the pad. They moved to Kane immediately, and he went with them with the particular compliance of someone who has conceded that the medical people are now in charge. The rest of the teams dispersed in the organized way of people who know exactly where they need to go next. Debrief, weapons clearance, medical screening. Maya stood on the pad as the rotors wound down and felt the cold air hit her properly for the first time. A base operations sergeant approached with a clipboard. He was young, maybe 23, and he had the slightly stunned look of someone who had spent the last 2 hours monitoring radio traffic and had developed opinions about what he'd heard. "Chief Warrant Officer Reed," he said. "Colonel Marsh wants to see you." "When?" "Now, ma'am." She looked at Ethan, who had come down from the aircraft and was standing with his flight helmet under his arm and his hair flat with rain. He made a small gesture that communicated, "Go ahead, I'll handle the post-flight." There was nothing to post-flight. The aircraft was at the bottom of a Colombian valley, with its rotor blades scattered across 200 meters of jungle. But the gesture was kind anyway. Colonel Marsh's office was a prefabricated room in the main command building, and it was surprisingly orderly for a man who had been managing a crisis for the last 3 hours. Maps, radio equipment, a desk that had actual paperwork on it in neat stacks, which suggested either impressive discipline or a very good aide. Marsh himself was in his late 40s, lean in the way that career military people get lean after a certain age, with the kind of face that had learned to communicate only what it intended to. He was standing when she entered. He didn't offer a seat. He looked at her, at the state of her, the wet uniform, the cut above her eye, the way she was holding her left arm slightly away from her body, and his expression moved through something before settling back into control. "Sit down, Chief Reed." "I'm fine standing, sir." That wasn't a suggestion. She sat. He pulled his chair around to her side of the desk rather than sitting behind it, which she noted. It was a choice that said something about how he intended this conversation to go. "Walk me through it," he said, "from the missile impact." She walked him through it. She was precise and sequential, the way she had been trained to debrief: time, action, decision, outcome. She didn't editorialize. She didn't offer interpretations. She gave him the facts in the order they had occurred, including the rerouted approach through the western draw, the stream crossing, the ambush, the extraction. When she got to the part where she went back for Kane, she stated it the same way she'd stated everything else. Marsh was quiet for a moment. "You left the aircraft," he said. Kane was 40 meters from the LZ and unable to walk. "You left the aircraft," he said again, with more emphasis, but not more volume. "Yes, sir." "Under direct fire?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. She held it. She had been looked at in this particular way before. The look that was trying to decide if she had been reckless or capable, and was finding the line between those two things harder to locate than expected. "You're not a ground combatant, Chief Reed." "No, sir." "You're a pilot." "Yes, sir." "So, explain to me the decision-making process that led to a pilot getting off a rescue aircraft during an active engagement to retrieve a wounded operator." Maya considered the question. It wasn't a complicated question from where she sat, but she understood that it was complicated from where he sat, because what she had done lived in the spats niches between initiative and insubordination, and which side of that line it fell on would be determined by people in this room and rooms like it. "There was a man on the ground who couldn't get to the aircraft," she said. "I was physically capable of getting to him. I went. It's not your job. With respect, sir, I don't think that's why you're asking." A pause. Marsh's expression shifted, not quite surprise, but the adjustment that happens when someone says something more direct than expected. "Go on," he said. "You're asking because you want to know if I understood what I was doing, or if I reacted without thinking. Those are different problems." She kept her voice level. "I understood what I was doing." He studied her. "Then, you've been in a ground engagement before." It wasn't phrased as a question. "I've had some training, sir." "That's not what I said." She held his gaze and said nothing. Marsh let the silence sit for a moment, which was itself a technique. Then he stood, which meant the conversation was moving to a different phase. "You're grounded pending review. Standard protocol for a crash." He moved back behind his desk. "Medical will see you tonight for the shoulder. That's not optional." He looked at her once more, and she caught something in it, not approval exactly, but a reevaluation that was still running. "Dismissed, Chief Reed." She stood and went to the door. "Reed." She stopped. "Kane's going to be fine. Surgery in the morning." They got both fragments. He paused. "I thought you'd want to know." She nodded once and went out. The medical bay was a single long room with 8 cots and better lighting than anything else on the base, which was either a statement of priorities or a practical necessity. The flight surgeon, a captain named Voss, had that specific quality of military doctors efficient without being cold, thorough without wasting time. She had Maya's flight suit off the left shoulder before Maya had fully registered. That was the plan. "Rotator cuff," Voss said, after a brief examination that involved a series of range of motion requests and reactions to pressure that Maya worked hard not to show on her face. "Probably a partial tear. We need imaging to confirm." "How long does that take to heal?" "With surgery, 4 to 6 months. Without, longer." Voss was already documenting. "You'll be in a sling by morning." "I have a grounding review in Chief Reed." Voss looked up. "You have a partially torn rotator cuff. The grounding review timeline is the least of your concerns right now." She returned to her documentation. "The cut above your eye needs 2 sutures, which I'll do now. Then I want you on IV fluids tonight, and actual sleep, which I understand may be optimistic." "I'll sleep." "You won't, but you'll lie down." Voss prepared the suture kit with quick, practiced movements. "You came back for the seal." It wasn't a question, and it wasn't part of the medical examination. It was just something that had apparently made its way around the base in the past hour. Yes, Maya said, under fire. Yes. Voss made a small sound that wasn't quite a response and focused on the sutures. After a moment, did you know him? Before tonight. No. 2 sutures, placed precisely. Hold still. Another moment of work. Then there's a difference between courage and training, you know. Most people with courage don't get enough training. Most people with training don't have enough courage. She finished and applied a small bandage. You apparently have both, which is either very useful or a significant liability, depending on who's doing the assessment. Maya said nothing. Voss handed her pain medication and a water bottle. Take these, both of them. She made a note on her clipboard. I'll have imaging set up in the morning. Ethan was waiting outside the medical bay. He had changed into dry clothes and had a cup of coffee in each hand, which was either thoughtful or pragmatic, or both. He handed her one without comment and fell in beside her as she walked. The base was still active, never fully quieted, but the specific urgency of the operation had settled into the slower tempo of aftermath. Personnel moving, reports being filed, equipment being accounted for. Somewhere in the command building, she knew the intelligence people were already working on Rios, and Holloway was probably sweating through his third collar of the night, explaining how the ambush had been waiting for them. Marsh wants a full written debrief by 800, Ethan said. I know. Shoulder, rotator cuff, imaging tomorrow. He absorbed this. That's 4 to 6 months. Minimum. Maya, he said her name in a particular way, not with sympathy, which she wouldn't have wanted, but with directness, which she preferred. They're going to have questions about what happened out there. I know. Not just Marsh. The review board. He wrapped his hands around his coffee. You engaged. You left the aircraft. I know what they are. I'm just saying that the way it's written up matters. She looked at him. And you're telling me this because... He was quiet for a moment. Because I was there. I can write it in a way that Write it accurately, she said. Exactly what happened. No adjustments. That might make things harder. Write it accurately, Ethan. He drank his coffee. Yeah, he said. Okay. They walked in silence for a bit. The cold had deepened with the cleared rain, the mountain kind of cold that had no interest in compromise. The lights of the base threw hard shadows off the buildings. You shot someone tonight, Ethan said. Not accusatory. Just noting. Yes. First time? She didn't answer immediately. Not because she was deciding whether to answer, but because the true answer was more complicated than yes or no, and she was deciding how much of the complication was relevant. No, she said finally. Ethan looked at her. She looked back with an expression that was not closed exactly, but was not open either. The expression of someone who has put something in a drawer, and the drawer is not currently available. He nodded. He didn't push it. That was one of the things she valued about him. Get some sleep, she said. You too. He stopped at the junction of 2 paths that led to different quarters. For what it's worth. The way you came back for Kane. He paused, choosing words. It mattered. She said nothing. Not just the outcome, he said. The decision to do it. She turned away before he could see whatever was on her face and walked toward the pilot's quarters alone. She didn't sleep until 430. Between the end of the medical visit and 430, she lay on her cot in the dark and ran the mission through her head in the systematic way that debriefing was supposed to externalize. She did this with professional detachment for approximately the first hour, cataloging decisions and outcomes and the chain of causation that had connected them. The missile, the crash landing, the western draw approach, the stream crossing, the firefight, Kane on the ground. Then, somewhere around 300, the professional detachment ran out, and she was left with the unprocessed version. The way the rounds had felt in the log in front of her face. Not heard, felt as impacts with velocity, as forces pressing through wood into her understanding of what proximity to death actually was. The way the man she had shot had moved through the gap in the undergrowth with the specific, confident movement of someone who didn't know he was already in someone's sights. The way Kane had weighed, dragging him through mud, the specific resistance of wet ground, and a body that was not helping in rounds that were continuing to fall around them. These were not things that debriefing would capture. She was not, she told herself, damaged by them. She had been in this territory before, and she understood the difference between the shock of experience and actual injury. What she felt at 300 on her cot was not trauma. It was the body's honest accounting of what it had been through. The bill arriving after the credit ran out. She let it run. By 400, she was back to something close to level, and by 430, she was asleep. She woke at 710 to the sound of someone outside her quarters door. Not knocking, standing, which was different. She was alert before she was fully awake, which was something she had trained herself into after the things she didn't talk about. The emergency she had never filed a complete report on. She opened the door. It was Henderson, the SEAL with the sun-damaged face, who had given her his rifle without being told to. He was standing with the particular ease of someone for whom discomfort has become the baseline. He had a fresh uniform and looked like he'd slept 4 hours and found that adequate. In his hand was a paper cup of coffee. He held it out. She took it. "I was going to knock," he said. "I was awake." Yeah. He didn't say anything else immediately. He was looking at her with the direct, uncategorical attention that operators sometimes brought to things they were trying to understand. "Kane's out of surgery," I heard. The base's information network moved faster than official channels always. "He wanted me to tell you." Henderson's jaw worked slightly, the way jaws do when people are organizing words they don't usually say. That he'd have told you the same thing if positions were reversed. He wanted you to know that. Maya drank the coffee. It was real coffee, not the base-issued version, which meant someone on the team had brought personal supply. "Tell him I know," she said. Henderson nodded once. "Then you flew us in through that western draw." "Yes. I was watching from the cargo bay." A pause. "I've been on a lot of air insertions. I've never seen anyone fly a Black Hawk through a gap that tight in those conditions." She looked at him. He wasn't offering it as flattery. His tone was too factual for that. He was offering it as information, as a data point being passed from one professional to another. "I've flown tight gaps before," she said. "Apparently." He took back the empty cup without being asked. "You should know. The team put in their debrief last night." He met her eyes. "All 6 of us. We wrote down what happened. The western draw. The stream crossing. What you did when Kane went down." She said nothing. 6 accounts, he said. Same story. In case anyone was asking. He turned and walked away down the corridor. She watched him go, and something moved through her that was not quite sentiment, and was not quite relief, and was not quite anything she had a clean name for. She closed the door and sat on the edge of her cot. Solidarity was an interesting thing, she thought. It showed up in unexpected shapes, not as speeches or formal gestures, but as 6 men writing the same story in the same night, handing it in before anyone could suggest a different version. She put on her uniform and went to find food. The base canteen at 730 was the social switchboard of FOB Condor, the place where information moved and relationships were maintained, and the informal hierarchy of the operational world sorted itself into breakfast tables. Maya had eaten here for 11 weeks and had learned its geography. The pilots sat at the middle tables. Support personnel clustered near the serving line. Special operations rotated through quickly, eating alone or in pairs, always with their backs to walls. She took her tray to the pilot's table and found Ethan already there, looking marginally more repaired than last night. He had the debrief form in front of him, partially filled out. Across the room, at the corner table, 3 of the SEALs were eating. Ortega, Walsh, Diaz, who had looked at her last night on the aircraft with that assessing gaze. He looked up when she sat down, and something passed across his face, not the assessing looks this time, but something that had been decided. He picked up his tray. She watched him move through the room and sit down not at the pilot's table, but at the adjacent table, close enough to be a statement, and far enough to not be intrusive about it. He set his tray down and went back to his food without making eye contact again. Ethan glanced at her. He had seen it too. "Interesting breakfast," he said quietly. "Eat your food," she said. "I'm noting the subtext." "There's no subtext. Eat your food." He ate his food. But he was almost smiling, which he covered with coffee. Outside the canteen windows, the morning was clearing, the Andean peaks emerging from cloud in the distance, white and enormous and indifferent. Somewhere in this building, a review was being assembled. Holloway was being deposed. Reports were being filed. The operational machinery was processing last night, the way it processed everything, with forms and protocols and chains of authorization that would eventually arrive at a determination. Maya ate her breakfast and thought about what Henderson had said. 6 counts, same story. She was not naive about institutions. She understood that 6 consistent accounts could be managed, contextualized, reduced to what a review board needed them to be. She understood that her grounded status was the beginning of a process, not the end of one, and that processes had unpredictable outcomes. She also understood something else, something she had learned years ago, in a different country, in a different kind of emergency, under a different kind of pressure, which was that you could not control what institutions decided. You could only control what you actually did, and then you either lived with it or you didn't. She had lived with hers so far. She pushed her tray back and looked at the debrief form in front of Ethan. "What time is the imaging?" Voss said 900. "I'll go after." She picked up her coffee. "Marcia's office afterward. I want to request access to Holloway's original mission planning documents." Ethan looked up. "Why?" "Because someone knew the extraction plan." He was quiet for a moment. "Then that's an intelligence matter. That's above. It's an aircrew matter," she said. "A missile struck my aircraft during a mission that was compromised before wheels up. That makes it absolutely my business." She held his gaze. "You think I'm wrong?" Ethan considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. "No," he said finally. "I think you're going to annoy a lot of people." "I annoy people efficiently." "That's true." He turned back to the form. "I'll finish this." Maya drank her coffee and looked at the mountains through the window, and in the middle distance between the base and the peaks, something was already forming, a question that had no clean answer yet, a thread that connected a prepared ambush and a missile strike and a civilian contractor's optimistic timelines and a compromise that had been waiting for them in the dark. She was a pilot. Pilots, by professional necessity, understood that the problems visible from the cockpit were never the whole picture. There was always what was above the clouds and below the radar and around the next ridge. She had been in this job long enough to know when a mission was not finished. Last night's extraction had been the beginning of something, not the end. She just didn't know yet how far it was going to go. The imaging confirmed the partial tear at 912. Voss showed her the scan on a light panel with the bedside manner of someone delivering expected bad news, which it was. "Grade 2, Voss said. "Conservative management is an option, but I'd recommend surgical repair. Especially given," she chose her words carefully, "your professional requirements. How soon can you schedule it?" "That depends on the review outcome. If you're being reassigned for treatment, we'd transfer you to a facility with a full orthopedic team." Voss turned off the light panel. "If the review keeps you here in some capacity, I can do the repair at Bogota." "And flight status? Realistically, 8 weeks minimum before you're in a cockpit under normal circumstances. Longer if there are complications." Voss said it without apology, which Maya preferred. Apology was for situations where the delivery of truth was optional. "I'm sorry, Chief Reed. I know that's not what you wanted to hear." "It's accurate," Maya said. "That's what I wanted." She left the medical bay and walked toward the command building. The day had fully arrived by now, cold and clear, the mountains visible in all directions with the kind of hard-edged clarity that high altitude produced after rain. Personnel moved around the base with the purposeful rhythm of an operational installation. There was always more work than time, and the work was always specific and necessary. She had found, over 11 weeks, that she liked this quality of OB, life more than she'd expected. The focus it imposed, the irrelevance of things that seemed important elsewhere. She was halfway to the command building when the operations sergeant from last night appeared at an intersection, slightly out of breath, with a look on his face that was controlled worry. Chief Reed, Colonel Marsh requests your presence. I was heading there now, ma'am. He specifically said now. The sergeant paused. Mr. Holloway is also in the building. She looked at him. He wasn't going to say anything more. He was 23 and prudent, but something in the set of his shoulders told her that whatever was happening in Marsh's office had moved past the standard review process into something with a faster metabolism. She changed her pace. Marsh's office had more people in it than it had the night before. That was the first thing Maya registered. When she walked through the door, the configuration had changed. Last night it had been 2 people and a conversation. Now it was 6 people and something else entirely. Marsh was behind his desk this time, which was also different and told her something. Holloway was in the corner nearest the door, sweating in the way he sweated regardless of temperature. 2 men in civilian clothes occupied chairs along the wall, the kind of chiselling clothes that were clearly chosen to look nondescript and achieved the opposite effect. A woman in Army intelligence insignia stood near the map board. And at the far wall, arms crossed, was a man Maya had never seen before, late 50s, compact, in a uniform that carried the specific gravity of serious rank with its patches removed. The door closed behind her. Chief Warrant Officer Reed, Marsh said. Thank you for coming quickly. She stood at a modified parade rest. Sir, you know Mr. Holloway? Yes, sir. Holloway did not make eye contact. That told her something. The others, Marsh continued, are here from an interagency task force that has been working the Rios case for 14 months. He did not provide names. That told her something else. There have been developments overnight that changed the parameters of your review significantly. He paused in the way that people paused when they were organizing information that needed to land correctly. The missile that destroyed your aircraft last night was a manpad. Specifically, an SA-24 that was recorded as destroyed in a 2019 operation in Ecuador. The room was quiet. That weapon shouldn't exist, Maya said. No, it shouldn't. Marsh looked at a point just above her head. It does, which means the network that supplied it is both better resourced and better connected than our previous intelligence suggested. He lowered his gaze. Rios has been talking. Not voluntarily, but talking. He confirmed that the ambush last night was coordinated from inside this operational structure. Holloway shifted in the corner. Maya looked at him directly. He looked at the floor. Mr. Holloway is cooperating with the investigation, Marsh said, with the tone of a man reading a line he'd been handed. He was not the source of the compromise, but he received planning information from a source that was. He cleared his throat. That's the background. Here's why you're in this room. The man with the rank-stripped uniform spoke for the first time. His voice had a quality, measured, flat, the voice of someone accustomed to rooms where words had direct operational consequences. Rios gave us a location, he said. A secondary site. Not the compound you went to last night, a communications relay station 40 kilometers further north. It runs the coordination network for the entire regional operation. He unfolded his arms. Our window to act on that location is 18 hours. After that, Rios' people will know he's been taken, and the site goes dark permanently. Maya did not move. The 2 pilots currently available to this FB, he continued, are both grounded. You, for the crash. Warrant Officer Cole, for the head impact. He looked at her the way the man at the top of an org chart looks at a problem that has been brought to him, already partially solved. The next available aircrew is 4 hours out from Bogota, which leaves you a 14-hour window instead of 18, Maya said. Which leaves us a win that becomes substantially more complicated if this takes longer than the intelligence suggests it should. The room waited. Masa understood what was happening in this room. Nobody was going to ask her directly. Nobody in a room with this configuration asked things directly. They arranged information until the conclusion was the only available path, and then they waited to see if you walked down it without being pushed. Her shoulder was in a sling under her flight suit. "What's the mission profile?" she said. Marsh looked at the man with the stripped uniform. Something passed between them, not agreement exactly, more like a marker being reached. "Insertion and extraction," the man said. "Standard package. The team that went in last night plus 2 additional personnel." He paused. "The insertion is the complexity. The site sits in a narrow valley with terrain that makes standard approach inadvisable." "What kind of terrain?" He moved to the map board. The Army intelligence woman stepped aside. He pointed to a topographic overlay that Maya recognized as LiDAR-generated, highly detailed, recent. She moved to the board. The valley in question was carved between 2 ridgelines that ran roughly parallel for 6 kilometers before converging. The floor was maybe 400 meters wide at its widest point, narrowing to under 200 at the northern end, where the target site sat. The entry corridor, from the south, was clean enough. The problem was the ridgelines themselves. They sat at elevations that would put a standard approach aircraft well within visual range of any lookout with eyes on the high ground. "You can't come in from the south," she said. "Correct. East Ridge is too high for NOE." "Correct." She studied the western approach. A draw similar to the one she'd used last night, but longer, and with a more complex exit geometry. It came in from a different vector and required a precise turn at the end to align with the valley floor. The turn had a radius that was going to be tight in a fully loaded Black Hawk. She traced it with her finger without touching the map. "This has been flown before," she said. It wasn't a question. The specific detail of the overlay and the pre-marked approach line told her this route had already been analyzed. It was assessed as inadvisable in a planning document from 6 months ago, the man said. Inadvisable isn't the same as impossible. No, it isn't. She looked at the turn radius, at the ridgeline clearance, at the exit geometry that required a specific airspeed to avoid the terrain feature at the valley entrance. What was the platform in the original assessment? MH-60. Weight? Combat loaded. Approximately 22,000 pounds. She calculated. "If you come off the combat load," she said slowly, "reduce to minimum personnel and minimum ammunition. Run it at night with NVG." She traced the approach again. "The turn is still marginal. But marginal isn't impossible." "No," he said, "it isn't." The room was very quiet. Marsh spoke from his desk. "Chief Reed, I want to be absolutely clear that this is not an order. Your medical status is." "I understand my medical status, sir." "Then I want you to understand that the decision here is entirely—" "Who's the co-pilot?" she said. Marsh stopped. She looked at the man with the stripped uniform. "If Cole is grounded, who's co-pilot?" A pause. "We have a warrant officer from the Bogota element. He can be here in 2 hours. I don't know him." "No." She looked at the map for another moment. The shoulder was a real problem. Collective inputs on a Black Hawk required both hands, and a partial rotator cuff tier was going to limit her range and strength on the left side in ways that would compound under stress. She knew this. She was not pretending otherwise. She also knew the approach geometry, and she knew that marginal approaches flown by pilots who had never seen the terrain before at night were not marginal. They were dangerous in a qualitatively different way. "Get me Cole's medical chart," she said. The Army intelligence woman looked at Marsh. Marsh looked at Maya. "Chief Reed Voss, cleared him for light duties. A Grade 2 concussion protocol allows for supervised activity in controlled conditions. She held Marcia's gaze. Flying isn't a controlled condition, but Ethan Cole has seen the terrain in this operational area. The pilot coming from Bogota hasn't. She paused. I'm not telling you to ground the Bogota pilot. I'm telling you the difference it makes. Marsh was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone on his desk. Ethan's reaction to the situation, when she found him in the canteen 20 minutes later and explained it, was a single long exhale through his nose. He set down his coffee. He looked at the table. Then he looked at her. Your shoulder, he said, is manageable. Maya. I flew the Western draw last night with a shoulder that was already compromised. I didn't know it yet, but it was. She kept her voice level. I know it now. That's actually better. That is not how medicine works. It's how flying works. You account for what you have, not what you wish you had. He was quiet. Then, what does the approach look like? She told him. She described the draw, the turn radius, the ridgeline clearance, the exit geometry. She was precise about the parts that were genuinely difficult and the parts that only looked difficult. When she finished, Ethan was looking at the table with the expression he got when he was running something through the practical part of his mind. The turn, he said, at combat speed. We have to be below 90 knots at the apex, or we don't have the radius. At night, NVG depth perception. Yes, and the exit? Clean if we hold the valley floor. Problem if we climb early. There's a terrain feature on the north side that's close to rotor height at standard altitude. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How marginal is marginal? It's flyable, she said. It's not comfortable. Those are different things. I know. He picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down. When do we brief? The operations room at 1,400 hours held a different team than the night before and a different weight. The 6 SEALs from the previous mission were back. Kane was not among them. He was still in medical, where he would remain. In his place was a senior chief named Ballard, whom Maya had not met, a broad-shouldered man from the additional personnel the man with the stripped uniform had mentioned. He had the specific quality of someone who had taken over a team in the field before not trying to stiff himself, just present and paying attention. Also present was the second addition, a woman in civilian contractor clothes named Park, who the intelligence briefer described as a signals specialist. Her job, apparently, was to extract specific data from the relay station's hardware before the rest of it was destroyed. She was small, maybe 30, with the composed manner of someone for whom this type of insertion was not new. She asked 3 precise technical questions during the briefing and listened to the answers without a question. Maya sat through the brief and mapped the information onto the approach geometry she had been running in her head since the morning. Weather was clear, window was tight. The SA-24 that had hit them last night had been traced to a storage point near the target site, which meant there was a possibility of additional manpad capability in the area. That was the part of the brief that the room absorbed quietly. Manpad suppression? Ballard asked. We'll have fast air on station, the briefer said. 2 FCC-18s holding at altitude. They can prosecute any confirmed launch site within 90 seconds. 90 seconds, Ballard repeated, in a tone that conveyed everything without stating anything. 90 seconds, the briefer confirmed, with the discomfort of a man delivering a number he knew was inadequate. Maya looked at the approach map. A manpad operated at ranges that made 90 seconds of fast air response time a formality rather than protection. If someone fired on the aircraft in the valley, they fired in the valley. Fast air suppressed the launch site afterward. This was the actual calculus. She said nothing about it, because there was nothing useful to say, and everyone in the room had already done the same math. They lifted at 1,917 hours, 40 minutes before full dark. The Black Hawk Raven ate a different Airframe, same weight class, came off the pad into still air and golden light, the Andes catching the last of the sun at angles that had nothing to do with what was happening at ground level. Maya had spent 2 hours in the afternoon with the aircraft, walking it, learning its specific behaviors, the way each aircraft had small individual qualities that a pilot needed to account for. This one pulled slightly right in a hover, and the anti-torque pedals were a little heavy. She'd filed both observations and adjusted her expectations. Ethan was in the right seat with the medication schedule from Voss tucked into his kneeboard that he would follow precisely because he was that kind of person. His helmet had been replaced. His shoulder was taped. He had completed the pre-flight checklist with the same systematic attention he brought to everything. And when Maya had asked how he felt, he had said functional in a tone that meant he had assessed the truth of that statement and stood behind it. In the cargo bay, Ballard, 5 SEALs, Park, and a weapons loadout that was reduced from last night by deliberate design. Minimum personnel, minimum ammunition. Every pound mattered on the turn. The flight south was clean and fast, and then they turned north toward the draw. 20 minutes, Maya called. In the back, Park was reviewing something on a ruggedized tablet. The SEALs were in the pre-mission state. Maya had cataloged the night before, not still exactly, but conserved. Ballard had his eyes open and was watching the terrain through the door with the particular attention of a man who trusted information better when he collected it himself. Ethan monitored frequencies. The fast air was on station. She could hear the check-in on the guard frequency. The FCC A-18s holding above cloud layer at altitude, their presence theoretical and reassuring and ultimately insufficient if things went wrong in the valley. She thought about the turn. She had been thinking about the turn for 6 hours. Not anxiously, there was no room for anxiety in the functional part of her mind, but with the kind of sustained, analytical attention that preparation required. She had flown it in her head 20 times. She knew the speed, the bank angle, the reference point on the western ridgeline that would tell her when to begin the rollout. She knew what it would feel like when it was right and what it would feel like when it was wrong. Knowing what wrong felt like was important, because wrong on this approach was not recoverable. 10 minutes, Ethan said. She descended to nap of the earth altitude and pushed the nose forward. The draw appeared as a darker shadow against dark terrain, the NVG imagery rendering it in the flat green that flattened depth and required pilots to fly by instrument and memory as much as sight. She had the LiDAR overlay on the moving map and her memory of it and the reference points she had memorized from the planning map. She entered the draw at 85 knots. The trees on both sides became walls in the NVG image, the rotor disc clearing the terrain features by margins that Ethan tracked without calling because he had been briefed to trust her judgment on clearances, and he had learned to do that. The aircraft yawed twice in rotor wash, she corrected. Her left shoulder ached with the collective input, but her grip held and the correction was clean. The turn was ahead. She saw the reference point on the western ridgeline, a specific rock formation that read as a particular shape in NVG, and began her bank. Airspeed, Ethan said quietly. I have it. 82 knots at the apex. Bank angle 40 degrees. The aircraft's weight shifted in the turn the way it always did, the main rotor unloading slightly, and she felt the familiar drop in collective effectiveness and compensated without thinking. The valley floor appeared through the turn, the flat green of open terrain, and she rolled out and dropped the nose, and they were through. Clean. Not comfortable, but clean. Nice, Ethan said, which for him was a speech. The target site appeared on the moving map at 2 kilometers. She kept the aircraft at 50 feet above the valley floor and pushed the speed back up to approach velocity. No fire, no launch warning. The valley was dark and still. 1 minute, she called. The LZ was a flat shelf on the western side of the valley, 40 meters from the target structure. She set the aircraft down in 7 seconds and held it while the team flowed out. Park moved with the SEALs, faster than expected, her tablet slung across her chest. Ballard was last off, and as he stepped down, he put his hand briefly on the airframe. Not a gesture she could read fully, but it was something. Maya held the aircraft in ground effect, while the team moved toward the structure. The relay station was not what she had pictured. She had been imagining something that looked like a military installation. What it actually was, from her position, was a cluster of prefabricated buildings arranged around the central antenna array, something that could have been mistaken for a platoon for a cell tower station from any altitude above 500 feet. The cartel was not unintelligent about concealment. Ethan was monitoring. The fast air checked in on schedule. Quiet, Condor Raven 8, on LZ. Team is moving. Raven 8, Condor copies. No traffic on approach. She settled in to wait. The wait on this mission lasted 11 minutes before it stopped being a wait. The first radio call came from Ballard, and the quality of his voice told her what was happening before the words did. Contact. North End. Multiple personnel. They were in the structure. Not arriving. In it. Already inside. Which meant the intelligence on the window had been wrong, or the site had been tipped, or both. The shooting started. It was closer than last night's ambush, because the structure was 40 meters away. Maya felt the rotors hammering against her desire to lift and held the aircraft on the ground. The team needed the LZ where it was. She did not move. Park Ballard's voice on the radio. Controlled but compressed. How long? Park's voice. 4 minutes. The encryption key exchange needs to complete. You have 9 seconds. I need 4 minutes. A pause filled with gunfire. Then you have 4 minutes and we hold. Maya watched the structure. Muzzle flashes from the north windows. The SEALs had established positions on the south and west sides. She could see the fire patterns, the organized return fire, that meant the team was functional and holding. But they were also pinned. She keyed the radio. Ballard. Raven 8. What's your north side? Open ground. They're bringing more personnel from the north tree line. She looked at the north tree line on the moving map. 200 meters from the structure. There was a feature there, a shallow rise that the approaching personnel would use as cover on their approach. Raven 8 is moving, she said. Ethan looked at her sharply. Hold this frequency. She pulled pitch and lifted the aircraft. You're going to get shot at. I'm going to make them shoot at me instead of the team. She pushed the nose north and descended back to 20 feet above the valley floor. Different problem. She moved the aircraft along the western edge of the valley at 50 knots, keeping terrain between herself and the north tree line as long as possible. The Black Hawk was not a gunship. It had no forward-facing weapons, and the door gunner on the left side was the only suppressive capability it carried. But a helicopter moving at low altitude in the dark was also an enormous noise and presence that commanded an attention in a way that a fixed position did not. She came around the terrain feature and put the aircraft between the tree line and the structure, 50 feet up, broadside. The door gunner opened up on the tree line. The response was immediate fire from the tree line, directed at the aircraft, which was exactly what she had calculated. She dropped the aircraft to 30 feet and moved laterally, keeping the movement irregular. A round hit the tail section. She felt it as a shudder and checked the tail rotor instruments systems nominal and kept moving. North personnel are repositioning, Ballard's voice. They're focused on you. I know. Raven 8, that is a bad place to be. 90 seconds, she said. Tell Park she has 90 seconds. She moved the aircraft again, forward and left, and the door gunner shifted fire, and another round hit the fuselage, this time below the cargo bay, and the sound it made going through metal was distinctive and unpleasant. Ethan was monitoring the systems board without speaking, his focus absolute, calling nothing because nothing had failed yet. Another round. Closer. These people were not cartel. Their fire discipline was too good, their pattern too organized. They were adapting to her movement. Raven 8, Ethan said, very quietly. We've taken 3 hits. I know. The fuel system indicator is minus. I know. She had seen it. A slow amber warning on the secondary fuel system. Not critical yet. Not yet. How long, Ballard? Park says 90 seconds. Then I need 90 seconds. She pushed the aircraft into a climbing bank that took it briefly over the tree line. Reckless by any standard, and she knew it, and then dove back down on the far side, which put the tree line between her and the primary fire sources. The door gunner worked the reverse angle. Below her, through the NVG, she could see figures moving at the tree line's edge, repositioning. She moved first. The aircraft took a 4th hit. Something in the left side that she felt as vibration in the cyclic. The vibration was wrong. Not tail rotor wrong, but wrong in a way that had a clock on it. Raven 8, Ethan said. The vibration, main rotor head. Possibly a blade strike. She was already analyzing it. The vibration had a frequency and an amplitude, and they told her things. It was not immediately catastrophic. It was progressing. She had minutes rather than seconds. Ballard. Now. Ballard's voice came back immediately. Package secured. Moving to LZ. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. She pulled the aircraft back toward the LZ, keeping the north side suppressed, the door gunner maintaining fire until the team was clear of the structure. The vibration in the cyclic was getting worse. Not quickly, but measurably, the way bad things progressed when they were given time. She set the aircraft back on the LZ with less finesse than the initial landing, the vibration translating through the airframe into a rattling that the team would feel when they boarded. She held it. The systems board was showing 2 amber warnings now. The fuel secondary was worse. The main rotor head indicator had moved from amber toward something she did not want to dwell on. The team came out of the structure at a run. Park was between 2 seals. Her tablet clutched to her chest, her expression the compressed focus of someone who has completed a task under conditions that were not in the original plan. She was bleeding from somewhere on her left arm, a cut, not a bullet, from the look of it, but bleeding. She moved without slowing. They loaded in 40 seconds. Ballard was last. He counted heads, confirmed the count with Ethan, and pulled the door. Go, he said. Maya pulled pitch and lifted. The vibration hit immediately, and hard worse, with the weight of the full team, the main rotor head working against a compromise that the additional load was amplifying. She had altitude and she had forward speed, and she needed both of them to get back through the draw, which was now behind her and required a 180-degree turn in a valley with compromised terrain clearance margins. How bad? Ethan said. He was watching the instruments with the focused calm of someone running calculations. Bad enough to matter, she said. Not bad enough to stop. She hoped that was true. She said it like it was true, because in that moment, making it true was a decision she was making. The draw, he said. I know. With this vibration, the turn. I know, Ethan. He went quiet. He understood as she did that the conversation was not going to change the physics. The aircraft was vibrating, the draw was ahead, and the turn was tight at speeds that would be insufficient to control the vibration, but necessary to make the geometry work. It was, in the most honest language available to her, a bad situation. She did not transmit that assessment. She climbed to the draw entrance altitude and reduced speed and entered the draw. The vibration at reduced speed was worse. That was the physics of it, lower rotor RPM harmonics, amplifying the imbalance. She felt it in her hands, and through the seat, and in the fillings of her teeth. Behind her, she could hear it in the cargo bay, the rattling that caused Ballard's voice to come forward. Raven 8, what are we dealing with? Blade damage. We're managing it. Are we going to make it through the draw? She did not answer that directly. Hold on back there. The reference point on the western ridgeline was ahead. She began the bank. At 42 degrees of bank, with a degraded rotor head, in a draw with terrain on both sides at night, the aircraft became a specific conversation between physics and pilot input, and the terms of that conversation were not favorable. She felt the main rotor unload in the bank, and the vibration spiked a hard, rhythmic shuddering that came up through the cyclic and tried to tell her hands things she could not afford to listen to. She held the bank. She held the airspeed. The valley floor appeared through the turn. The rotor head warning went red. Not amber, red. She rolled out of the bank and dropped the nose and pushed the airspeed up, and the valley opened ahead of her, the LZ 7 kilometers north, and the red warning stayed red and the vibration stayed bad, and the aircraft kept flying, which was the only relevant data point. Raven 8, Condor actual. The operations center had her on radar. Raven 8, we're showing anomalous flight data. State your status. Ethan reached for the radio. We're RTB, she said before he could transmit. All personnel aboard. Aircraft is damaged. Declare precautionary landing at FOB. Raven 8, confirm all personnel aboard. Extracting now. She pushed the airspeed higher. The vibration did not improve with speed, but the flight dynamics did, and flight dynamics were what kept them in the air. Get medical standing by. We have a wounded civilian contractor. Copy. Raven 8. Medical is standing by. You're cleared direct approach. 7 kilometers. She flew. The rotor head was red the entire way. The vibration was a constant physical fact, something she was no longer processing as alarming and had reclassified as information about the state that was continuing to function despite the state it was in. She understood the machine. The machine was doing what machines sometimes did, more than it should have been able to, for reasons that had to do with tolerances and margins, and the fact that catastrophic failure was a threshold, not a gradient, and they had not crossed it. Not yet. FOB Condor's lights appeared at 4 kilometers. Then 3. Then she was on. The approach and the landing light came on. She'd left it off the entire flight, old habit. Now she turned it on, and the pad was ahead. She set it down. Hard. Harder than she wanted. The vibration translated into the contact with the ground as a shudder that moved through the whole aircraft and then stopped. And then the aircraft was on the ground, and the rotors were spinning down, and the cargo door was already open, and the medical team was moving toward them. Maya ran the shutdown. Her hands were shaking. She noted this as information, the same way she had noted the rotor head warning factually, without judgment. Her hands shook on the checklist. She completed the checklist anyway, because the checklist didn't care about her hands. Ethan sat in the right seat until the rotors were fully stopped. Then he exhaled very slowly and said, just that. Okay. She looked out through the cracked chin bubble at the pad where the medical team was working, where Park was being moved to a stretcher with the measured urgency of professionals, who were concerned but not panicked, where Ballard was standing in the cargo door watching Maya through the cockpit glass, with an expression that she couldn't fully read in the landing light, but that had stopped looking like assessment. It looked like something else, something that people who had been in the air with her for the last 40 minutes had arrived at through their own direct experience, not through anyone's account of her, not through 6 written statements or its colonel's review or a reputation that had never been hers to write. She unstrapped. Her left shoulder gave when she reached for the harness. Buckle, the rotator cuff, hitting the edge of what it would do, a sharp, hard protest that ran from the joint to her fingertips. She made a sound she didn't intend to make. Ethan reached across and got the buckle. I have it, she said. I know, he said, and released the buckle anyway. She climbed out of the aircraft and stood on the pad in the cold mountain air, and her legs were fine. And her hands had stopped shaking, and the shoulder was what it was. And around her, the base was doing what bases do after aircraft return from places they weren't certain they'd return from moving with purpose, beginning the process of making sense of what had just happened. The rotor blades on Raven 8 were visibly wrong. She could see it from the ground, a deformation in the blade tip on the number 3 blade, where the round had struck. A warping that had turned the precision instrument into something that had been asking the physics for a favor for the last 7 kilometers. The physics had said yes. She stood and looked at the blade for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the command building because there were people in there who needed to be told what had happened. And that was the next thing. And the next thing was what mattered now. Behind her, Ballard's voice came across the pad. "Read." She stopped. He was still standing in the cargo door. In the landing light, his face was readable now. She had been right about the expression "it was not assessment." It was something simpler than that. "You kept us in the air," he said. She didn't answer. "I've been doing this for 18 years, he said. "I know what that cost you tonight." She looked at him for a moment. Her shoulder ached with a consistency that had stopped being sharp and become a fact of the immediate landscape, like the cold and the altitude and the sound of the rotors finally stopping. "Packages secured," she said. He nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." She turned and walked across the pad toward the lights of the command building, and the night was very clear and very cold, and the mountains around FAB Condor were enormous and dark and utterly indifferent. And somewhere behind her, the medical team was working. And somewhere ahead of her, Marsh was waiting. And the extracted data on Park's tablet was going to need to be analyzed by people who understood it, and none of that was her job. Her job had been to get the team there and bring them home. She had done her job. Marsh was not alone. The man with the rank-stripped uniform was still there, and he had been joined by a second man who sat in the corner chair with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for a specific piece of information and had now received it. He was older than anyone else in the room, maybe 65, with the kind of face that had been weathered past the point where age made further impressions. He wore no uniform. He carried nothing visible. He had the quality of a man who had spent so long operating in rooms where authority was implicit that he had stopped needing its outward signals. Maya stood in the doorway for a moment before entering, reading the room the way she read weather, what the configuration told her, what the body language said about what had already been decided. Marsh looked like a man managing something larger than he had expected. "Close the door," Marsh said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. Her shoulder was broadcasting steadily now, the adrenaline of the flight fully metabolized, the injury speaking in its own unambiguous terms. She had declined Voss's immediate offer of pain, medication outside the medical bay, because she wanted her head clear for whatever this was. She was beginning to reassess that decision. The aircraft, Marsh began. Main rotor blade, number 3. Round struck the tip section, compromised the balance. "I have the full assessment in my post-flight." She had written it on the pad while the rotors were still spinning down. She always wrote post-flight notes immediately, before the details softened. "Raven 8 is down for depot-level maintenance. Minimum 3 weeks. Possibly non-recoverable. I'm not asking about the aircraft." She waited. "I'm asking about the decision to reposition during the firefight," he said. "You lifted from the LZ during an active engagement. Without authorization. There was no time to request authorization." "There is always time to request authorization." Chief Reed. "With respect, sir, there isn't. Not when the timeline is 90 seconds and the team is pinned." She kept her voice flat. "I made a tactical decision to use the aircraft as a suppression platform to draw fire away from the team's position. The team completed the mission. The package is secured. We extracted all personnel." She paused. "I'd make the same decision again." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. The man in the corner spoke for the first time since she had entered. His voice was quieter than she expected, and more precise. "Chief Warrant Officer Reed, before we continue this conversation, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." She looked at him directly. "Sir, have you done this before?" The question was simple on its surface. Beneath it was something else, a shape that she recognized from the way it had been delivered, the specific emphasis that meant he was not asking about tonight or about the previous night. He was asking about a longer history. She took a moment. Not to decide whether to answer that decision, had already been made for her by the weight of 2 missions in 2 nights, and a room full of people who were clearly already working for more information than she'd been shown. "Yes," she said. Marsh looked at her. "Define your previous experience," the man said. "Not unkindly, precisely." "I'm not sure what you already know," she said. "I'd prefer your version." She looked at the surface of the desk in front of her for a moment, not avoiding the question, but organizing it. 11 years of a career that had 2 separate chapters, and the line between them was a classified operational record that she had signed papers promising not to discuss in uncleared company. She did not know the clearance level of the man in the corner. She knew he was cleared for something by his presence in this room, but something was not necessarily her. Something. "I need to know who's in this room," she said. Marsh straightened slightly. It was the kind of response that registered as pushback. The man in the corner reached into his jacket and produced a credentials wallet. He opened it and held it up. She read it from where she sat. She read it twice. Then she looked at him with a slightly different assessment than she'd had 30 seconds ago. 6 years, she said. Joint Special Operations Command. Aviation support to direct action missions in 3 theaters. I left JSOC 4 years ago for health reasons. She said health reasons in a tone that indicated it was the official reason and also an accurate one, and also not the complete picture simultaneously. Assigned to conventional Army aviation. Spent 14 months at Fort Campbell, then the rotation system. This is my 3rd overseas posting since the transition. The room was quiet. Health reasons, the man said. I had a partial mental health review following an incident in my final JSOC rotation, she said. The words were flat and sequential, stripped of everything that would make them harder to say. She had practiced that stripping for 4 years. I was cleared to return to duty with conventional aviation, not cleared for return to JSOC or equivalent tier units. She paused. That's the official record. And the unofficial record? The incident in question was a mission in which the primary extraction aircraft was destroyed, and I made decisions that were outside my designated role that resulted in the successful extraction of the team and the elimination of the high-value target. She looked at him steadily. The review board had concerns about my decision-making process. Not the outcomes, the process. What kind of concerns? That I acted without authorization at critical decision points. She let that sit for a moment, which is the same concern being raised tonight. The man in the corner looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was not quite said fast, but was in the same neighborhood. Do you know what's on Park's tablet? He said. The shift in subject was deliberate. She followed it. The data she extracted from the relay station. Communications architecture, presumably. Possibly financial routing. Possibly, said. Also a personnel file, specific to this FOB. He let that land. The person who compromised your first mission. The one who provided the extraction plan to the cartel's logistics network. He paused. It's not Holloway. She had not assumed it was Holloway, but she had not excluded it either. She waited. Holloway received his planning information from a source inside the base intelligence section, the man said. Someone who has been passing operational data for approximately 7 months. He looked at her with the directness of a man making a point by indirection. Someone who had access to every mission plan that moved through this FOB in that period. Including mine, she said. Including yours. He closed the credentials wallet and put it away. We have the name. The arrest is being coordinated as of an hour ago. He stood, which changed the geometry of the room. Chief Reed, the reason you're in this room tonight is not to answer for your decisions. The reason you're in this room is that I need to understand what I'm looking at. She looked at him. 2 nights, he said. 2 compromised missions. 1 lost aircraft, 1 heavily damaged. In both cases, the mission objectives were achieved. In both cases, your decisions were the primary variable that made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. He stopped in front of her, and his manner was not threatening, It was appraising, with the precision of someone who had spent decades assessing human capability and had developed very little tolerance for inaccuracy in that assessment. That is not conventional aviation performance. No, she said, it isn't. So I'm asking you, directly and off the record, what am I looking at? Maya considered the question. It was the question she had been not answering for 4 years in various indirect forms. The base assignments, the deliberately unremarkable performance reviews that were good enough to maintain her career and not good enough to attract attention from people who would ask questions she didn't want to answer. The careful, sustained project of being overlooked. 2 nights of crisis had apparently made that project untenable. A pilot who was trained for something specific, she said, and who has been doing something less specific for 4 years because the specific thing ended badly and she wasn't sure she wanted to go back to it. And now? She didn't answer that immediately. She thought about Ethan releasing the harness buckle, about Henderson handing her a rifle without comment, about 6 men writing the same account in the same night, about Kane on his stretcher and the SEAL Challenge coin that had been mentioned in no official document, but that she had heard about from Ortega during the brief. He sobbed. The way things moved through teams. I think the specific thing found me, she said. The man studied her. Then he turned to Marsh. I'll need a full operational review of Chief Reed's JSOC record. He moved toward the door. And I'll need it cleared for Colonel Marsh's level by 600. He paused at the door without looking back. We'll continue this conversation after the arrest is processed and the data from the relay station has been analyzed. He opened the door. Get your shoulder looked at, Chief Reed. He left. The door closed. Marsh sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who had just watched something happen in his office that he would be thinking about for some time. He looked at Maya. JSOC, he said. Yes, sir. 4 years ago, you were flying direct action missions for JSOC. Yes, sir. And you've been in conventional aviation since. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment, not angry organizing. The mental health review. You said the board had concerns about your decision-making process. Yes, sir. Did you agree with their concerns? She thought about that honestly. It deserved an honest answer. Partially, she said. I made decisions without authorization that I believed were correct. The board was right that authorization matters, and they were right that I have a tendency to proceed when I believe the tactical situation requires it, regardless of whether I've been told to. She paused. I don't think they were wrong to be concerned. I think the concerns were real. But you do it again. I've done it again. Twice. In 2 nights. She held his gaze. If I'm being honest with you, sir, which I think is what this conversation calls for, I'm not sure I'm capable of not doing it again in the same circumstances. Marsh absorbed this. He picked up a pen on his desk and turned it in his fingers once, then set it down. That's either a significant liability or a significant asset, depending on who's assessing it. That's almost exactly what my flight surgeon said. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile. Voss is perceptive. He stood, which meant the formal portion of the conversation was ending. You are still grounded pending the operational review. That has not changed. He moved around the desk. But the review is now being conducted at a different level than it was this morning. He stopped in front of her. Go get your shoulder treated. Actual treatment, not the version where you accept medication and then sit in your quarters running the mission back in your head. I can do both. I know. Do the treatment first. He picked up the phone. Dismissed, Chief Reed. Voss was not sympathetic about the shoulder, which was consistent with her general approach to medical facts. You flew on this for another 6 hours after I told you it needed surgical repair, she said, reviewing the imaging from the morning against her current examination. Her tone was not accusatory. It was the tone of someone documenting. The circumstances were, I'm aware of the circumstances. The entire base is aware of the circumstances. She pressed 2 fingers into the space below Maya's acromion and watched her face. That hurt. Yes. And this more. Yes. The tear has extended. We've gone from grade 2 to grade 3. Voss removed her hand and made notes. You have significant instability now. Without surgical repair, you are looking at a very long recovery with an uncertain outcome. With surgery, we're looking at 6 to 8 months before you're flying. Maya sat with that. 6 to 8 months. I'll schedule the transfer to Bogota tomorrow, Voss said. The orthopedic team there is competent. I'll send your imaging and my notes. She pulled the sling back into position with practiced efficiency. I'm also setting something to the record. Not medical a recommendation to whoever is doing your operational review. Maya looked at her. I've been a flight surgeon for 12 years, Voss said. I've worked with pilots who were fearless because they didn't understand the risks. I've worked with pilots who were fearless because they had a professional death wish, which is a real thing and nobody likes to talk about it. She met Maya's eyes directly. And I've worked with a very small number of pilots who understood the risks completely, had no death wish whatsoever, and proceeded anyway because the calculation said, proceed. She held the gaze. You're the third kind. I want that noted somewhere by someone with more authority than me. Maya didn't say anything. That's not a compliment, Voss said. It's an observation. She closed the medical file. The third kind tends to get broken in specific ways. Be aware of that. She left Maya in the examination room. Kane was awake. He was in the base medical bay on the post-surgical cot that was farthest from the door, which someone had probably arranged for him. Because people who have been doing dangerous things in remote locations most of their adult lives tend to sleep better with their back to a wall and a clear line of sight to exits. He looked pale in the way that surgery made people pale, not weak, just temporarily drained of a resource that would come back. He looked at Maya when she came through the door. He didn't look surprised. Voss told you I was awake? He said. Ethan told me. Cole, Kane assessed this. He's been by twice already. Brought me food both times, which I didn't ask for and ate anyway. He shifted in the cot, which caused a brief tightening around his eyes. Sit down. She pulled the chair from the wall and sat. I heard the second aircraft come in, he said. I was awake. I heard the rotors. He looked at her directly. I heard the way they sounded. She said nothing. Blade damage, he said, at a guess. Number 3 blade. Round strike. He nodded slowly. You made it through the draw in that condition. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Ballard called me, he said. From the pad. 14 seconds after you landed. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at her. He's not someone who calls people. He sends reports. Writes concise mission summaries. Doesn't call. He paused. He called me. She waited. He said, and I'm quoting because it's Ballard. And he doesn't use extra words, he said. Your pilot flew a damaged aircraft through a mountain pass in the dark to bring us home and didn't tell anyone how bad it was until we were on the ground. Kane stopped. You should know that. The medical bay was quiet. Down the hall, some equipment was running. The ventilation moved air with a low, steady sound. I was doing my job, Maya said. I know. Kane's voice was even. That's the point. She looked at him. He looked back. The coin, he said. He reached to the side table carefully, with the deliberateness of someone managing pain, and picked up a challenge coin. He held it out. It was a SEAL team coin. Not the specific team, the unit insignia was worn on the edge in a way that told her it had been carried for years. She didn't take it immediately. Kane, I'm not giving you a coin because you saved my life, he said. I did a count. You've done 6 things in 2 nights that meet the standard. The retrieval is one of them. He held it steadier. Take it. She took it. It was heavier than it looked. The edge was warm from his hand. She turned it once and looked at the inscription on the back. Not on my watch. 4 words in small, clean letters. The review is going to go a specific way, Kane said. I've been on the radio. He didn't elaborate on who he'd been on the radio with, and she didn't ask. The SEAL network was not a formal structure, but it functioned with more efficiency than most formal structures she had encountered. There are people in this building who have opinions about what you've done in the last 48 hours. Not all of them are favorable. I know. The unfavorable ones are going to argue that you exceeded your authority twice and damaged 2 aircraft, and that a properly managed operation would have had additional qualified crews available, and none of this would have been necessary. He said it without inflection, presenting it the way a reasonable counter-argument deserved to be presented. They're not wrong on the facts. No, she said. They're not. How are you planning to handle it? She turned the coin in her fingers. Honestly, the same way I've handled the last 2 nights. I'll say what I did and why, and whoever's deciding can decide. He looked at her with the directness he brought to everything. That's going to annoy people. I've been told that before. Does it bother you? She thought about that honestly. Yes, she said, less than the alternative would. He made a sound that was the closest thing to approval she had heard from him, that wasn't filtered through tactical communication. The man from the agency, he said. He talked to you. Yes. He's been working the cartel network for 3 years, Kane said. The relay station you hit tonight is the biggest material gain in that investigation since it started. Park's data confirms the entire financial architecture, routing, personnel, contact protocols. He paused. That data makes the networks stoppable. Not immediately, but stoppable. He looked at her with steady eyes. That happened because you repositioned during the firefight. It happened because the team held the position, and Park completed the extraction, she said. Both things are true. She set the coin carefully on the side table and pushed it toward him. You should keep it. I have others. Kane, Chief Reed. He met her eyes. I've been in this work for 16 years. I know the difference between someone who found themselves in a difficult situation and got lucky, and someone who has a specific kind of capability that looks like luck from the outside but isn't. He held her gaze. Keep the coin. She picked it up. The door opened and Ethan came through it with 2 cups of coffee, stopped when he saw Maya recalibrated without missing more than a half step, and handed her one of the cups. I was bringing it to him, he said. He said you'd already been by twice. I've been by 3 times. I told Kane twice, because 3 sounds like a lot. Ethan pulled a second chair from the wall and sat down with the matter-of-fact quality he brought to most situations. He looked at Kane. How's the leg? Surgical, Kane said. That's not an adjective. It is now. Ethan drank his coffee. The 3 of them sat in the medical bay, in the particular silence that followed the kind of events that were too large and too recent to be discussed head-on. The ventilation moved. Down the hall, something beeped once and stopped. The review board meets at 800, Ethan said eventually. I know, Maya said. Marsh is running it. The agency man will be there. He paused. There's a brigadier general coming from Bogota. He lands at 600. She looked at him. How do you know that? The operations sergeant. He said it without apology. He talks when he's nervous, and he's been nervous since last night. He's a good source. Kane made a sound that might have been amusement. The general is coming to review the overall operation, Ethan continued. Both missions. He has authority over your status. He held his coffee with both hands. I looked him up. Brigadier General Alan Foster commanded a combat aviation brigade in Afghanistan, 2 tours. Before that, he was in JSOC Aviation for 8 years. Maya was still. JSOC Aviation, she said. Yes. She turned the challenge coin in her fingers without looking at it. He'll know your record, Ethan said carefully. Not as a warning. As information delivered the way he always delivered information he thought she needed, without editorializing. Without the cushioning that people sometimes added, because they were uncertain how the recipient would handle the truth. Yes, she said. He will. She thought about what that meant. Her JSOC record was not a record of unremarkable performance. It was specific and detailed, and it ended with a mental health review and a transition to conventional aviation and 4 years of deliberate obscurity. Foster, coming from that world, would not read the record the way a conventional aviation officer read it. He would read the missions, the decisions, the outcomes, and the review board's concerns, and he would have his own assessment of what those things meant, formed by 8 years in the same environment that had formed her. That assessment could go in multiple directions. Whatever happens at 800, she said, write your debrief accurately. Both nights. I always write it accurately. I know. I'm saying it anyway. She stood, which cost her more than she let show the shoulder, the fatigue, the accumulated debt of 2 nights that her body was beginning to present as a bill. Get some sleep, Ethan. You too. She looked at Kane. Get better faster. I'm working on it, he said. She left the medical bay and walked out into the dark base. The coin in her closed hand, the mountains invisible around her but present as they always were in the pressure of altitude, in the quality of the cold, in the particular weight that high terrain imposed on air and lungs, and everything that moved through it. The 800 review was 6 hours away. She went to her quarters and did something she had not done since arriving at Faux B Condor 11 weeks ago. She dug to the bottom of her kit bag and retrieved a worn manila folder that had been there the entire time, sealed with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age and altitude. Inside was her own copy of her JSOC operational record. Not the official version, the version she had made for herself before leaving, the one that contained the incident reports and the mission logs and the review board transcript, all of it. Every word, including the words that were hardest to read. She had carried it for 4 years without opening it. She opened it now, not to rehearse it, not to prepare a defense. She had been honest about everything she'd done, and she was going to continue being honest about it, and no amount of reviewing her own record was going to change what it said. She opened it because the man from the agency had asked what he was looking at, and she had answered him, and the answer had felt like the first honest accounting she'd given of herself in 4 years. And she wanted to sit with the full version of that account for a while before a room full of senior people did their own version of the same assessment. The first page was a mission report from a valley in eastern Afghanistan in the winter of a year she could calculate by subtraction. The mission had been a direct action hit on a facilitation node. The primary extraction aircraft had been hit on approach. The tree had been delayed. The team had been pinned. She had been the pilot of the primary aircraft. She had, after the crash, picked up a weapon and held a defensive position for 38 minutes until the secondary arrived. The review board had noted that she had acted without authorization at multiple critical junctures. They had also noted that the team had been extracted and the objective had been achieved. The gap between those two observations was the thing she had been living in for 4 years. She read for 2 hours. Then she put the folder away, set her alarm for 715, and lay down on her cot in the dark. She didn't sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and listened to the bass, settle into its nighttime rhythms, and thought about the coin on the side table next to Kane's cot, and about Voss's careful taxonomy of pilots, and about the man from the agency's credentials wallet, and about a JSOC general who would land in 3.5 hours with her record already read. Then she slept. It was not peaceful sleep, but it was sleep, and that was enough. The alarm went off at 715, and she was already awake. She had been awake for 20 minutes, lying in the dark with the specific alertness that precedes something significant, not anxiety, but attention, the body's way of preparing itself for a situation that mattered. She shut off the alarm, sat up, and held still for a moment while the shoulder announced itself. Grade 3 now. It had opinions about sitting up quickly. She dressed carefully. Clean uniform, which she had laid out the night before. Lightwing centered. Name tape straight. She was not performing professionalism. She was exercising it the way she always had. The discipline of presentation as a form of respect for the process, even when the process made her uncomfortable. The coin was in her left breast pocket. She walked to the canteen, ate without tasting the food, drank coffee that she actually tasted, and was at the command building at 752. The operations sergeant was outside the review room. He looked like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. "They're ready for you, Chief Reed," he said. "Is General Foster in there?" "Yes, ma'am." Landed at 614. She nodded and went in. The room held 5 people arranged behind a long table, which was the formal configuration that said this had moved past conversation into something with a record. Marsh was in the center. Foster sat to his left, a man in his mid-50s with the compact physicality of someone who had spent decades in rotary wing aircraft and the particular posture of someone for whom seniority had become a natural state rather than something achieved. The agency man was at the far end. The Army intelligence woman was there, with a tablet and a recorder. And beside Foster, completing the row, was a JAG officer, whose presence indicated that someone in this process had decided the legal framework needed to be explicitly present. That was new. Maya stood at the position of attention at the opposite end of the table and waited. "At ease," Foster said. His voice was measured. Not warm, not cold. Professional. She relaxed to parade rest. Foster looked at her for a moment, not the way Marsh had looked at her, which was the look of a man calibrating a variable he hadn't accounted for. Foster's look was more direct than that. It was recognition, which was different. "I've read your JSOC record," he said. "I expected you had, sir. All of it, including the review board transcript." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment. "I was on the senior leadership team at JSOC Aviation when you were there. Not in your direct chain, but in the building." He paused. "I remember the Afghanistan incident." She held his gaze. "Then you know the facts, sir. I know the official facts. I'm more interested in yours." He leaned forward slightly, his forearms on the table. "The review board concluded that you demonstrated a pattern of unilateral decision-making that was operationally effective, but structurally problematic. Do you agree with that assessment?" "Partially, sir." "I agree that it's structurally accurate. I've had 4 years to think about whether it's the complete picture. And what do you think the complete picture is?" She chose her words carefully, not to soften them, to make them precise. "I think there are situations where the structure that normally governs decision-making cannot function at the speed that the situation requires. In those situations, someone makes a decision, or the situation decides for everyone. I've been present in those situations, and I've made the decision." She paused. "I think the review board was correct that this creates a structural problem. I think the review board was also looking at it from a position where the structural problem was the most visible thing, and the alternative outcomes, what happens if no one makes the decision, were hypothetical." "You don't think they're hypothetical," Foster said. "No, sir. I think they're very specific." He held her gaze. Something in his expression had been running a long assessment since she walked in, and it had now reached a conclusion that his face didn't fully display, but that changed the quality of the silence in the room. "The first night," he said, "the Western draw approach. Walk me through the decision." She walked him through it. Speed, bank angle, the terrain features, the reason the planned approach was no longer viable, the calculation she had made about the Western draw in real time. She was precise about what she had known, and what she had estimated, and where the margins were. He listened without interrupting. "The second night," he said, "repositioning during the firefight." She walked him through that too. The door gunner's field of fire, the 90-second window, the calculation about drawing fire away from the team's position and what it would cost the aircraft versus what it would cost the mission if the approach positions reached the structure before Park completed the extraction. Foster was quiet when she finished. Marsh was watching the general. The JAG officer was making notes. "The rotor head warning went red during the return flight," Foster said. "Yes, sir." You continued the flight. "The warning indicated a progressing compromise, not an imminent failure." I had 7 kilometers to the FOB. Auto-rotation to a suitable surface was available if the failure threshold was crossed. I continued because the probability of controlled landing at the FOB was higher than the probability of catastrophic failure in transit. She paused. I was wrong to not inform the team of the severity. That was an error in judgment. The room noted her volunteering that. Why didn't you inform them? Foster asked. She thought about the honest answer. Because informing them wouldn't have changed anything they could do, and it would have changed what they were doing in the cargo bay. They had a wounded contractor. They were managing the extract. Adding information that created concern without changing anyone's ability to act on it. She stopped. It was a judgment call. I may have gotten it wrong. You may have, Foster said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back. Chief Reed, I'm going to tell you what I see, and I want you to tell me if I'm wrong. He looked at her with the directness of someone who had decided to be straight. You are an extraordinarily capable aviation officer who spent 6 years doing some of the most demanding rotary wing work in the military, who then experienced a mental health episode following a high-intensity incident, who was correctly identified as needing a transition period, and who has spent 4 years in that transition period being deliberately less than what you are. The room was very quiet. In 2 nights, the circumstances stripped the deliberateness away, he said. And what was underneath it is what I'm looking at now. He put his hands flat on the table. Am I wrong? She held his gaze for a long moment. No, sir, she said. You're not wrong. He nodded once. The mental health review from 4 years ago. Your current status. I've maintained my therapy requirement. Quarterly sessions, which are documented. I was cleared for return to full duty 2 years ago by the reviewing psychologist. I chose not to request reassignment. She said it plainly. I wasn't ready, and now? She thought about the folder at the bottom of her kit bag. The 2 hours of reading in the dark. The specific exhaustion of carrying something at partial weight for 4 years because you weren't sure you could carry it at Freyden, full weight, and you were more afraid of dropping it than of the ache of holding it wrong. I think the last 2 nights answered that question, she said. Not the way I would have chosen to answer it, but answered. Foster looked at Marsh. Something passed between them, not words, the shorthand of senior officers who have worked in the same systems long enough to communicate efficiently. Then Foster looked at the JAG officer. Captain. The JAG officer set down her pen. Based on the operational record and the review of Chief Warrant Officer Reed's conduct across both missions, there are no charges to be referred. The decisions made were outside standard authorization parameters, but fall within the established doctrine of individual commander's initiative under conditions of communications breakdown, and imminent threat to mission-essential personnel. She said it with the flat precision of someone reading a conclusion that had already been reached. The aircraft losses are attributed to enemy action. The medical record will be updated to reflect combat-related injury. Marsh was watching Maya with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. The agency man spoke for the first time since she'd entered the room. The data from the relay station has been preliminarily analyzed. The intelligence value is significant. The financial routing alone gives us 3 interdiction points in the network that we didn't have access to previously. He paused. The mission will be assessed as successful at the highest relevant classification level. Meaning, Foster said, looking at Maya, that what happened on that second flight will be acknowledged in the places where it matters. She said nothing. You're being transferred to Bogota for surgical repair of the rotator cuff, Foster continued. Recovery timeline is 6 to 8 months. During that period, I'm requesting that your file be reviewed for reclassification. He met her eyes. There is a position opening in JSOC aviation support in 6 months. The requirements match your record precisely. He stopped. I'm not offering it. I'm telling you it exists. The room held. Maya stood at parade rest in front of 5 people who had just done the thing she had spent 4 years assuming would not happen or not like this. The assumption being that the institution would process what she had done and arrive at a determination that was correct by institutional logic, which was not always the same thing as the truth. The institution had done something different. It had looked at the same facts and reached a conclusion that was, as far as she could tell, accurate. "That was not nothing, sir," she said. "There's something I want to say." Foster waited. "I'm not asking for the J position or any specific outcome from this review." She kept her voice level. "I'm also not going to pretend that the last 2 nights didn't happen, or that what happened wasn't what it was." She paused. "What I'd ask is that whatever is written in the official record accurately describes the actions and the reasoning behind them. Not the flattering version, and not the version that's most convenient. The accurate one." She held his gaze. "Because the accurate one is the only version I can stand behind." Foster studied her for a long moment. "That's exactly what it will say," he said. "They arrested the source at 1,100 hours. Maya heard about it from Ethan, who heard about it from the operations sergeant, who had been in the hallway when the intelligence section was secured and 2 base personnel were escorted out by military police. One of them was a senior analyst named Carver, who had been at FOB Condor for 14 months longer than almost anyone else. Long enough to have built a comprehensive picture of every mission that moved through the operations center. Carver had not been careless. The review of his communications showed a meticulous, patient operation, small amounts of information, passed infrequently through channels that were sophisticated enough to have survived 14 months of counterintelligence monitoring. He had been caught because the relay station's data contained his identifier code in the routing architecture. He had not tried to run. Ethan told Maya this in the canteen over coffee that neither of them tasted, and she sat with it for a while without speaking. 14 months of missions. 14 months of teams going into the field, carrying information that had already been sold. The pilots who had flown those missions. The operators who had gone in. The ones who hadn't come back out. "How many compromised?" she asked. "They're still assessing." Ethan held his cup. "More than 2. She looked at the table. "It's not your fault," he said. Not as comfort as a fact he was presenting, because it was true. "I know that. I'm saying it anyway." She looked at him. He had the same quality he always had, direct, without softness, but not without care. The 2 things coexisted in him without contradiction. She had come to rely on that in 11 weeks, more than she had realized until this moment. "The review went the way it went," she said. "I heard." He didn't elaborate on how. "Foster. He was fair, more than fair, from what I understand." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "You wrote your debrief." "Last night, both nights. Accurate as requested." He paused. "I also added a section that wasn't requested." She looked at him. "An account of every technical decision you made across both missions. The Western Draw approach, the stream crossing navigation, the repositioning during the firefight, the return flight with the rotor head warning." He held her gaze. "I wanted someone in authority to understand that those weren't instinctive decisions or luck. They were informed, real-time analysis under pressure." He picked up his coffee. Voss did the same. She flagged it separately. Maya sat with that. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I'm aware." He drank. "I did it anyway." She went to see Kane at 1,400 hours, her last visit before the transport to Bogota that was scheduled for 1,600. He was sitting up. The pallor of surgery was fading. He had a laptop open on the side table and was reading something with the focused attention of a man who did not stay passive comfortably. "You're leaving," he said when she came in. "Transport at 1,600. He closed the laptop. "I heard about the review. News moves fast. It always does when the news is something people wanted a specific outcome on." He looked at her directly. "The JSOC position, it exists," she said. "That's all." "Is that all?" She pulled the chair from the wall and sat, her arm in the sling, the shoulder better for the painkillers. Voss had finally convinced her to take at full dose. I don't know yet, she said honestly. 6 to 8 months is a long time to decide. Or not very long at all, depending. Depending on what? He looked at her with the steady, uncomplicated directness that she had come to understand was simply how he engaged with things he found important. Whether you've decided you're done being smaller than you are. She looked at him. He looked back. That's significant amount of insight for someone who's known me for 2 days, she said. I've known you longer than 2 days, he said. I just didn't know your name for most of it. She understood what he meant. The western draw, the stream, the firefight, the LZ, 40 meters of open ground with rounds falling around them. You knew people in compressed time when the compression was the right kind. The coin, she said. Keep it. She put her hand over the breast pocket where it was. The inscription. He nodded. It applied, he said simply. She stood. Her shoulder protested the shift in position, with a specificity that was clarifying a reminder that the body kept its own accounting, that everything had a cost, that the costs were real even when the outcomes justified them. Get better faster, she said. Still working on it. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was careful around her right hand, avoiding the shoulder, which was a consideration she hadn't expected and which moved something in her that she managed without showing. Read. He held for a moment before releasing. Whatever you decide about the position, make sure it's what you want, not what the institution wants, not what you think you owe anyone. He met her eyes. What you want. She nodded once and let go. Ethan walked her to the transport pad. He carried nothing. She had her kit bag on her right shoulder and her flight helmet bag in her right hand and the sling on the left. The afternoon was cold and clear, the mountains in full definition in every direction, the kind of day that the Andes occasionally produced as a reminder that the landscape existed independently of what human beings were doing in it. The transport was a UH-72, a light utility helicopter, nothing she'd been responsible for. The pilot was a young warrant officer who looked at her wings and her sling and her name tape and made the connection in real time and then looked carefully at the middle distance for the rest of the pre-boarding process. At the edge of the pad, Ethan stopped. Bogota, he said. Bogota, surgery recovery. He looked at her then. Then I'll know more than I know now. He was quiet for a moment. A long one for him. For what it's worth, he said finally. I'd fly with you again. It was simply stated. He meant it precisely as he said it, without elaboration, because that was how he said things that were important. I know, she said. I'd fly with you again, too. He nodded. He stepped back. She turned toward the transport. Maya. She stopped. The JSOC position. He stood with his hands in his pockets, the wind moving his collar. I hope you take it, not because the institution needs you there, because you were good at it. He paused. And you know it. And spending another 4 years pretending otherwise is a waste. She looked at him for a moment, then she turned and walked to the aircraft and climbed aboard. Bogota came up below them 40 minutes later, the city enormous and specific and loud in the way that cities were loud after weeks at altitude. The orthopedic facility was on the south side of the base. Her appointment was at 1,800. She had 4 hours. She spent 2 of them in a chair outside the facility with her kit bag on the ground beside her and her right hand on the coin in her breast pocket. The choice that Foster had not offered but had described was not a complicated choice in the end. She had made it complicated for 4 years by treating it as a question about what she was capable of when it had never been that kind of question. She had always known what she was capable of. 2 nights in the Colombian mountains had not taught her that. They had simply made it visible to people who had needed to see it. The actual question was the one Kane had named, what she wanted. She turned that over in the way she had turned the coin in her fingers, examining it, checking its weight, reading what was written on it. What she wanted was to fly the way she had flown for 6 years before she stopped. the specific kind of flying that required everything she had and gave back something that nothing else gave. The corridor of a draw at night, the geometry of a marginal approach, the calculation of variables that would defeat a computer if it didn't have a human's ability to decide that the answer was yes when the math said, wait. She had been afraid to want that. Not of the flying, never of the flying, but of what wantings it said about the incident in Afghanistan and about the review board and about the 4 years of careful smallness she had built as a kind of atonement for decisions she still believed were correct. The atonement was over. She wasn't sure when it had ended whether it was the Western Draw or the Stream or the LZ or the second aircraft with the red warning light holding altitude through 7 kilometers of dark mountain air. Maybe all of those things together. Maybe the moment Foster had said, I remember the Afghanistan incident, and she had felt not dread, but a strange, quiet relief, the relief of being known accurately by someone with the standing to assess what that knowledge meant. She took the coin out of her pocket. Not on my watch. 4 words. She had thought, the first time she read them, that they were about aggression, the refusal to let something bad happen on your shift. That was part of it. But sitting outside a medical facility in Bogotá with the mountains at her back and the city ahead and 8 months of recovery between her and a decision that had already been made, she read them differently. Not on my watch meant, this is my watch. I am present, I am accountable, and what happens here is mine to affect. That was all it meant. That was everything it meant. She put the coin back in her pocket and stood up and went inside to tell the orthopedic team she was ready. 8 months later, Maya Reed walked into a briefing room at a location that did not appear on any unclassified map and sat down at a table with people who knew what they were looking at when they looked at her record, because they had records of their own that ran in similar channels. She was not the same as she had been before the 4 years. She was not the same as she had been before Afghanistan. The shoulder had healed to 94% of its original function, which Voss had called remarkable, and Maya had called sufficient. She carried a small scar above her right eye, where the sutures had been, and a challenge coin in her left breast pocket, and a folder of documentation that she had stopped needing to read about 6 months ago, because she had finally internalized what it said. The briefing was about a mission, a specific valley, a specific window, a specific set of variables that made the approach geometry marginal at best. The officer running the briefing looked at her and asked if she understood the conditions. Yes, she said, I've flown worse. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether that was confidence or honesty or both. It was both. Good, he said, and continued the briefing. A uniform tells people what you do. Your actions show them who you are. And who you are is not determined by what people thought of you before the moment that required you to be exactly yourself is. It is determined by what you did when that moment arrived, and whether you were willing to carry the cost of it, honestly, without apology, all the way to the end.